the bulk of the changes that we are looking at right there. So let me stop there and turn that back to Commissioner Ely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. Next, we're proud to release our federal funding dashboard, and we've been working really hard over the last few weeks of being able to demonstrate all of the federal funding that is coming in to Tennessee into our counties. And so we've been working with the customer-focused government team, and Clifton Pay is with us here today, and he's going to kind of drive us through this program to be able to demonstrate to you guys what this program looks like. And I would point out before Clifton gets into this that this dashboard that he's going to show includes all of the federal funding that we are aware of that's coming into Tennessee. So it's not limited to the funds that the state has authority over with the CRF funds that Director Thurman just talked about a minute ago. So this is on our F&A website, and so I'm gonna get up and let Clifton drive this and show you what we've got. Oh, yeah.
She got him.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Commissioner Ely. As the Commissioner mentioned, the purpose of this dashboard is to see all available stimulus funding at the county level related to COVID-19. Some of these funds are direct awards from the federal government, and some of these funds have been visualized and are pass-through dollars that Tennessee state government distributes. So you can see the dashboard, which is now live. You can access it by going to tn.gov/finance or going to the Looking For tab in the top left navigation bar, or accessing it through the Financial Stimulus Accountability Group page. This dashboard was developed with the user in mind. It's very intuitive and really incorporates two really cool features, one around formatting and one around interactive features. The dashboard is formatted to read from left to right, then top to bottom. Following this flow of information allows the user to dive deeper into more granular data that they can read, whether starting at the statewide level, then drilling down to the countywide level, and then getting to the individual recipient level. The dashboard also allows users to display data through interacting with certain components, which emphasizes the tool's usability. For example, a user can click on their county and all relevant data filters display automatically. Additionally, the dashboard automates the calculation of grant totals based on a user's filter selection, which increases convenience and reduces the chance of user error. So let me just scroll down a little bit so you can get a better view. So the dashboard is separated into four major components: the statewide county map, the overview of funding streams, or the award type, which is in the top right-hand portion of the screen, the recipient ledger, which is directly below the top portions, and then the last section is the recipient ledger by filter. So starting with the first section, the state map view, and this is a geospatial view of Tennessee. And if you see, it has ability to hover over each county. And so the state map shows gives the user the ability to display community data by simply clicking on their county. The dashboard automatically filters the overview of funding streams and recipient ledger once this action is completed. The map also allows the user to hover over their county to see the total amount of funds allocated to the community to date. So if you see how we're hovering over Hamilton County, we're showing about $850 million has been allocated to date. Another county to highlight would be McNairy, and you can see about $17.3 million have been allocated to date. The next component of the dashboard is the overview of funding streams in the top right-hand portion of the screen. And the overview of funding streams, also known as the award type, allows a user to see the overview of each funding stream allocated to the state when there are no filters applied. So when a county filter is applied, the section automatically provides the community with an overview of these types and quantity of funds allocated to their communities. So this provides the citizen with a snapshot of COVID-19 assistance for their community. And the total funding that you can see at the bottom is the $13 billion. The next section is the recipient ledger filter, and this allows the user to filter all data on the dashboard by funding source, whether it's state or federal, county, and award type. This feature is helpful for citizens attempting to complete specific searches or state employees needing to inventory all funds associated with one funding stream allocated to counties. So for example, the employee could filter by award type and then see an inventory of all allocations that award to those counties across the state. So if we click on all funding sources, click on, see if we can pull up Shelby County. And then looking at, let's see, Tennessee Business Relief Program. And you can see about $9.6 million have been awarded to Shelby County to date.
Okay, so let's make sure we're tracking on this. So of the 200 or so $1 billion plus that we put into the Tennessee Business Relief Program, what this is tracking is so far 9.675 million has been received by donors, by the recipients of businesses in that county, in Shelby County, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct, Commissioner.
Okay. And we can do that by each county and know everybody that has received dollars and how much they've been. Okay, great.
And that's a good segue, Commissioner. And so the next section directly below the recipient section is the recipient ledger. And this is a source of all data on the dashboard and provides line item information that the Commissioner was just mentioning about each recipient of COVID-19 assistance in Tennessee. The ledger provides the county, shows the county where the recipient lives in, the type of award the recipient received, and the total amount of the award. So this section also includes a calculated grant total that automatically calculates the total amount of awards within the ledger based on the applied filters. So when the dashboard is unfiltered, this grand total displays the total amount of state and federal dollars the state has allocated to COVID-19 assistance. So if we were to clear this out and then select Davidson County, we'll see the total amount of money that has been awarded to date. So about $2.7 billion has been awarded. And again, you can see line item detail showing the recipient name, the award type, and the total dollar amount that has been awarded.
And that's all of the different ways that they've gotten funds from the feds, no matter where it came from.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Yeah.
And then just the last part of this screen is just the disclaimer that we update this dashboard as information becomes readily available. There are certain sources of information that comes from the federal government that the state doesn't necessarily have control over. But again, once we do receive the appropriate information, we make those updates as needed. And then lastly, with regards to the SBA and PPPs, the Small Business Administration released a certain segment of data that shows the exact amount of awards for loans under $150,000. And so that is also reflected within this dashboard. That concludes my presentation.
Did you notice he under the mask he's growing a beard?
I see that. I didn't see that.
Okay. So thank you, Clifton.
Yes.
Your team's done a great work in being able to filter and put all this together in one place that every Tennessean can go to. So y'all done a great job with that. Before we go to Tony, who's been leading our effort on developing our policy proposals, I think one thing that we ought to kind of make note of as we look at this and what Tony will present. You know, when we started this group several months ago, we discussed holding back a large chunk of dollars that would be used for revenue shortfall purposes. And, you know, at that time, I know you will recall that we expected then to get really clear, positive guidance in the near term that would hopefully allow us to use some of those funds. Well, as you know, as time has continued, we still cannot use those funds directly for revenue shortfall. And so as a result, the governor asked us to move forward in preparing a plan to make sure that we could spend every dollar of these funds between now and the end of the year, because as you know, these have to be expended by December the 30th. And so we've put together, Tony's continued to put together a plan that utilized all these funds in various buckets that we've been talking about along the way. Some of that will help us with payroll expenses and some of the things that we have already expended that are directly COVID related. But it's been a little more difficult to move through that part of the process. But we are excited about where we are now and the programs that we announced just recently, and then the programs that we're continuing to work on to spend the balance of these funds. So with that, Tony, I'll turn it over to you and let you go through that.
Thanks. And if we could start on slide 7, I'll start with just a brief update on 2 programs that have been announced since the previous meeting, and then I'll provide a status on where we're at currently within our spending projections, and then I'll move into a brief description of what we are hearing and expecting out of the congressional debate and negotiations ongoing and our plans for adapting to that, or the impact of those plans on the plan before you. Beginning with this update, local governments, a local government reimbursement program was launched late last month, providing $115 million in allocations to municipalities and counties across the state for reimbursement of their COVID-19 related expenses. These funds come in over and above the $210 million appropriated by the state by the State General Assembly in the last budget. And it also comes in addition to $75 million that we are holding in coronavirus relief funds to cover the cost share for local FEMA public assistance claims. Last week, we held 3 training town halls with nearly 600 jurisdictions across the state. We still have about 120 outstanding who have not completed that training, and we'll be reaching out to the members and their leadership to encourage them to participate. The portal for submitting expenses is open today. We have started to receive the first request for reimbursements. You may recall from the previous description of this and our previous conversations that the funds will become available on August 17th in the form of a 30% advance. We'll be asking jurisdictions to submit expenses to document that 30% advance, after which the 70% remaining funds will be released. By September 30th, if jurisdictions have not met that 30% threshold, we will work to deobligate those funds or determine whether or not those funds can be reallocated to either other localities who may have excessive needs or to other eligible uses in the coronavirus relief fund. We've also launched last week the nonprofit relief program overseen by the Department of Human Services. We've selected 6 grant administrator nonprofits. Those are contractor nonprofits for the state who will be serving in an administrative role to distribute these funds. We are in the grantee nonprofit application period is open. It will close on August 15th, after which grants will be processed. oversubscribed for any region or for the state, we will look at competitively ranking or reducing these grants in order to reach as many eligible expenses as possible. And if funds remaining, we'll look at reallocating. If you move to the next slide, I'll move on to the update on where we're at currently with the Coronavirus Relief Fund. You'll see on the left-hand side of that column, those are expenses that have been confirmed and paid as part of the FY20 closing process. In the blue column, you'll notice the chart of expenses that we are tracking. You'll notice some increase from prior estimates in our health costs, reflecting some additional efforts taken on by our Department of Health to support local efforts, as well as contact tracing and other provider support. We're also tracking some increases in our PPE costs that are not covered by FEMA. Those are to help provide for the teacher kits that our Department of Education and TEMA have partnered for to provide for K through 12 students across the state. If you look at the bottom, you'll see two numbers. Our remaining funds, if we're projecting a full reimbursement or full maintenance of our unemployment trust fund, our remaining funds currently will be $243 million. That is assuming that we continue to fund unemployment trust fund needs at the rate projected back in July. That is, of course, subject to changes in economic conditions, improvements in the economy, or changes in the number of claims we could experience in the unemployment program. You've also seen modeled out there a V-shaped recovery or an optimistic recovery if we were to experience a sharp decrease in those unemployment claims and not need to provide that additional funds. That's the amount that would be remaining. For the purposes of the planning going forward, however, we're going to plan for the unemployment trust fund to be fully obligated on this. You'll also notice on the third column out to the right, you'll see these items broken out by category. Our unemployment cost projections for the relevant grant period of the Coronavirus Relief Fund is $939 million. Our estimated costs from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, again, not taking into account other sources of funding, just sources of funding from the CRF. We are expecting $251 million to be spent, as well as $344 million in reimbursement to the state for costs incurred, and then $585 million that's been authorized and underway for third-party relief. So moving on to what's ahead, page 9, slide 9, you'll see those notes reflected there. The objective that we have moving forward as we approach the December 30th end date for this grant award is to ensure that the state is ready to direct funds in response to changing circumstances. That means that we will be prepared to adapt to any federal changes or congressional amendments to the terms of the existing funds or duplication of funding priorities, which we will get into in the next few slides. We'll be able to respond to any improvements or deterioration of economic indicators, primarily unemployment, as well as remain prepared to address any shift in demand for public health resources. We're not expecting the latter two to be significant draws on this fund, but we will maintain a cautious approach. We'll also continue to assume that nothing will change from Congress. We're learning more by the day that may change. And so we're starting to map out and model what that impact would be. If you move on to the next slide.
Let me just make a comment here. I think one of the things that we want to communicate, and you said that, but we recognize that it's an ever-changing landscape at the moment. We don't know what our public response will need to be going forward because we don't know what the virus will do. For example, we also don't know what the federal government will end up deciding. As you all know, there's a lot of uncertainty about that right now. So our strategy, just to reiterate, is planning for the remaining funds. Part of that strategy is to monitor monthly. We're monitoring it more than monthly, but basically just monitor this thing month to month and make adjustments within the framework of our plan based on what's happening on the ground. So that over the next part of what you're talking about is just that. It is our best sense of what we might do going forward, depending on what the circumstances on the ground are.
Thank you, Governor. Well taken. What the big picture objective here will be to have ready for this group options to choose from, which will address existing funds and be able to exhaust those funds by the December 30th deadline. But we are expecting or planning for the potential of changes that will cause us to rethink that plan, and we'll be able to come back to this group. We've mapped out one scenario, which is continuing those assumptions that there are no new flexibility or funds awarded by Congress. This would capture the priorities that have been reflected by this group in past conversations. It would also reflect what we think will provide immediate relief and essentially shovel-ready projects in which funds could be quickly distributed. So this is just one scenario. It's not the plan or a recommended plan, but we are sharing it for feedback and to invite dialogue on what that scenario should look like or what should it represent. These potential expenses would include expansions and additions to the existing small business relief program, a second phase. That would also include targeted relief supports for diverse business enterprises. It would include priorities from agricultural industry relief, broadband, and workforce development, as well as investing or evaluating what supports could be provided for housing or rental assistance. It is something that we tracked early on in the course of the public health emergency, but did not. But the need, in part because of other supports that came through, was not did not rise to the level that some anticipated may. We're also looking at planning for the future, remarketing and reinvesting in the tourism development institutions that have been hit the hardest as part of the public health emergency and the reaction to it, evaluating plans for which we could fund those. All of these numbers here are there to represent placeholders based on what we know today. We'll continue to model out and receive input on what the needs are in these various industries, as well as other priorities or needs that could be included in a plan. I've also mapped out a second scenario in which more funding becomes available, in part because of improvement to the unemployment rate. That would the easiest. We won't have information on how quickly those funds could be released. We'll monitor that on a monthly, if not weekly basis with labor and workforce development. The most shovel-ready and easiest option for distributing a large amount of funds quickly will be through additional business relief. However, we can continue to consider other priorities and potential expenses that can fit into that, that could fulfill those additional funds, should this scenario play out. So those are just a couple of scenarios. We'll continue to work to create a more formal plan and recommendation for this group over the next 2 weeks. As part of that formal planning and recommendation, we'll continue to monitor what's happening in Washington. As of last week, the House and the Senate had been relatively far apart in negotiations. We understand those negotiations are continuing, but noted in this slide are a few of the potential changes that we are anticipating. The the first set of changes are proposed changes to the coronavirus relief fund itself. Under the Senate GOP proposal, there is some limited capacity for revenue replacement based on the formula described and some of the limitations attached to that proposal. It would not be of benefit to Tennessee for the past fiscal year and likely not for the future fiscal year ahead. They've also provided, also are discussing an extension of time. When the coronavirus relief fund was contemplated as part of the CARES Act, it was contemplated as part of a short-term response. As the public health emergency has persisted longer than anticipated. One area where there seems to be some bipartisan agreement is in extending the end date of this grant program. And then, of course, the biggest question mark will be around the amount. Currently, the Senate GOP proposal proposes no new funds for state and local governments. The House proposal proposes additional funds for state and locals. We imagine that over the course of those negotiations, some figure will be arrived at to provide additional funds for state and local governments. But we'll continue to monitor and respond accordingly. The other big category of congressional changes, and where I think we'll have to make the most significant changes to the plan, will be appropriations that could duplicate or otherwise impact the priorities included. One major this point of discussion that's been covered at great length is the question of whether or not to extend some enhanced unemployment insurance benefit. That will have impact on claims processed and something that we'll continue to monitor as it impacts the CRF funding. There's also multiple expansions of programs that are being contemplated that would overlap with the identified priorities laid out in the scenarios and in other conversations with this group. Specifically, expansions and improvements to the PPP program, additional investments in education and workforce, as well as new funds for medical provider relief. There would also be likely appropriations for new funds that would support other priorities like childcare, agriculture, and behavioral and mental health. What we'll work on, moving on to the next slide, as part of our framework and what we'll commit to coming back to this group with in the final plan is the plan will account for any new CRF funds that may be appropriated by Congress. It would provide a model or projected impact of whatever changes occur for the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. And it would reorder priorities to eliminate or reduce those duplicated by Congress and allow these funds to truly be a gap filler to meet Tennessee-specific or Tennessee-unique needs. We would also consider, if revenue replacement were to become a possibility, designating funds for that purpose in light of whatever formula or terms could be created by Congress. And then, of course, lengthening the time horizon of existing programs to ensure that those programs are funded on a longer time horizon than the current December 30th date. So with that, I'll pause for questions.
Yeah, good deal. That was a great overview, Tony, and I think we can all see that this is like a huge funnel that we started out with a few months ago, and as we have learned more from guidance and as we've gotten more clarity on the priorities that we wanted to fulfill, we continue to kind of funnel down to where we're spending these dollars and we're putting in the places to get the most bang for the buck. Before we go to questions, I want to get input from folks on the call, but I do want to point out, I believe that Commissioner Hatcher is also on the phone. We mentioned the ag program, and so he's on here with us as well. And I'll also point out, Tony and I are depending a lot on our consultant, Horn, Anna Strobel, and Brian McDonald are on with us today if there are any other technical questions. And so they're all with us as well that may be answered. First, let's go to Governor McNally. I believe you got a question, Lieutenant Governor.
Yes, thank you, Butch. I was wondering if at some point you could put the information on state, federal funds to the counties, if you could put it on a per capita basis in the county. I wanted to make sure that, you know, the Memphis or Shelby and Davidson County weren't ending up with a disproportionate share on some medium size and some of the smaller counties.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. I was just conferring with Clifton over here. He initially thinks we can do that. We're not sure of the level of effort that may entail, but we'll explore that more, and we'll get back to the group. But at least at this point, we'll plan on trying to pull that together. That'd be a good measure.
Well, if you can, you might just try to do it on Cameron counties and my county. That's it.
Just do that by just do that by hand.
We can do it by hand. I know that. I know we can do it by hand. So yeah. All right. Any other questions? Speaker Sexton, any question on your part? Let's
Anybody else on the committee?
Let's go to other members. Any other points anybody wants to make, even if it's not a question?
Hey, Commissioners, Trey Hargett, and I know that the money the Secretary of State's Department received is really a rounding error in the overall scheme of things when it comes to election administration and the LSTA grants. But y'all do have your ear to the ground in D.C. based on what you're talking about. Do you have any inkling about whether or not there's going to be more money for election administration, and if there's going to be another match associated with that? You know, we used reserve funds to match the dollars last time and would be prepared to do so again. But there are a lot of states that frankly are in a difficult position. When I was before the Rules Administration Committee last week, you know, I advocated for there not being a match just for that reason, because a lot of states just frankly are in the worst position we are, and didn't know if y'all had any insight.
Yeah, and so I think we know we don't have a whole lot of unique information there. The Senate proposals that were rolled out last week didn't touch on this significantly. I know the House proposal had some funding to support what's been termed as vote by mail. I think that funding was more targeted and limited in what it could do, and not as open-ended. I think similar to how the CARES Act negotiations proceeded, I think you can envision a scenario where a compromise position is to take that funding and provide it for a more open-ended purpose to support general election security and processing. But that's just at this point, it's just speculation.
I appreciate you sharing. Thank you.
Senator Ackberry, you have a question?
I did, but I don't have it anymore. So I actually lowered my hand.
Wow, that's good. Thank you. Anyone else? I know that
I think Representative Marshall had a
there
question.
continue to be a lot of moving parts.
I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to say thank you for listening to our thoughts about the non-payment of rental properties, and I think you all have brought that up. I think that's a good idea of trying to help the property owners and help them pay their bank notes, and also the broadband expansion program, I think, is something that we're very interested in the rural areas. I appreciate that.
Yeah, good point. On this broadband, just to reiterate to the group, Tony mentioned, but I mean, these have to be shovel ready. So we went ahead and asked ECD to go out to the providers and kind of seek their input in what they could do. And so we'll be coming back to the group and reporting back on that. But these have to be done by year end, even so. And so obviously there's only a few type projects that might fit into that category as we do this. So, but any that we could do would be very beneficial, as you point out. So we at least figured that we ought to go down that path and see what we could do with any of those funds. So,
and if they extend the dates, if they happen to, that's why we can monitor this. If they extend the dates of this to give us another year to spend these funding, then that can change the trajectory for something like that. So I think it's important we get it in place because we might have a lot more flexibility.
thank you.
Question, Commissioner.
Representative Love.
Thank you. Thank you for what you all have been doing so far and for the timeliness of your reports and also for working with me on several things I'm trying to get done for our African-American communities. Did have a question about small businesses. The program we put out with the 28,000 businesses that were helped. It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, if a business opened in January and had to close down because of coronavirus, they did not necessarily qualify for that program because they would not have been paying taxes because they weren't open in the previous year. So how is that correct?
Is that right?
Go ahead.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Hey, I want to get Commissioner Jerry Gano to answer that. Just he's on the line. I want to make sure we get this right. David, are you on?
I am. That's correct. We are relying on sales tax data and business tax data, and we looked at. We needed annual gross receipts. So we looked at 2019 as the year for sales tax and business tax in order to identify those annual gross receipts and identify those businesses. So I think Representative Love, your statement is correct.
So I wanted to see if we could at some point have a conversation about what we might be able to do for those small businesses that opened up in January and had to close down because of coronavirus. They had no taxes due, but yet would have sales tax reduced or eliminated. And many of them may have tried to file for PPP and maybe didn't get it, I'm not sure. But I did want to make sure that we at least look at those businesses. I got a few messages from constituents who were unable to apply or qualify rather for our state program, which is wonderful, but they didn't meet the criteria only because they opened up a month or two late. And I wanted to make sure that we at least had a conversation at some point about what we might be able to do for those businesses. I'm not sure how we would capture them because they haven't filed taxes, but we can look at, I think, and see if there's some way to look at business licenses that were issued and maybe work with our county governments to see what business may have opened up in, again, January or February, but had to close down or had reduced sales.
Yeah,
that's a good point, Harold. And we need to look at that and have a conversation. It's complicated because as you know, we structured this payment based on the size of the business and all kinds of things based around their revenue and their tax returns. And so that we distributed different portions of the funding to different size businesses. But what we can do, and we knew we would have circumstances like this where we go, okay, this is a one-off scenario, not one business. So we need to take a look at that and see if there's some way to rectify that.
Okay.
And we will. That's a good point.
And maybe it's a nonprofit out there who will apply for this $150 million portion who can identify those businesses in that area and specifically help them. But I just want to put that out there for the group to hear about.
Yeah, that's good. Did
Good
you have
point.
something else? Did you have something
that
else?
was that was it. I've already emailed Tony and Commissioner Ely about some other stuff I'm working on with some
Okay,
issues in a nonprofit arena. So I'll circle back to them about that.
Okay. Thank you. Hey, Senator Jackberry, I knew you were going to have a question. So.
You know, I had to come back to me. Some folks said some things that kind of piqued my interest. But I will just reiterate what Chairman Marsh said about the support for those who are facing eviction. I have received several just heartbreaking emails to my office, and I check all of them that have kind of highlighted people who really are facing evictions. And then on the other side, also those who own these properties, who they themselves are looking for some sort of relief. So I think it's a kind of a win-win. Do you guys have any information on the amount of folks that are projected to face eviction, or is that handled locally more so, or it's just out there?
We had some preliminary conversations with the Tennessee Housing Development Agency back in April, more May, where we had started to contemplate bringing this forward. They had estimated the impact, and I may misstate it, so don't hold me to it, but the impact on it, just their Section 8 programs to be somewhere close to $40 million in lost payments. If you may recall, the federal government paused evictions for those federally managed properties. But it turned out that number ended up being much lower than projected, closer to 10 million. That could be attributed to multiple causes, but we're now having a second round of conversations with them starting this week to start to model out what conditions have changed or could be changing over this next month and what that impact could be. So we'll come back to this group with a number that's more data driven. But that's a conversation to be had.
Okay, perfect. And I'd also like to kind of advocate for those who are not in Section 8 housing, who, are still unemployed and might have to, will have kind of that loss, that cliff and loss in federal funds, and might not be able to pay their rent as well. And again, not only does the person who's facing eviction suffer, but so does the landlord. So if there's a way to provide relief for those folks as well, that to me, I think it would go a long way to kind of help people directly.
I will note that housing assistance is also an eligible use under the nonprofit relief program for nonprofits who want to provide that support.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, guys. And also thank you for really taking the time to prepare these slides and everything and make sure that we understand it. I think it's been very helpful. It's a lot to navigate through with these funds that we've received. So thank you so much for your work.
I think I want you to repeat, Tony, for my clarity and understanding, and Ramesh, we can talk about this too, to go directly to the concern you have about those rent payment assistance, but nonprofits that are directly related to assistance around really around housing, low income housing of any kind. Those nonprofits qualify for this grant program through CARES Act.
Yes, sir. A nonprofit who wanted to provide emergency financial assistance to prevent homelessness, eviction, or foreclosure could apply for a grant to support those activities.
They will have to apply.
That's right.
Yeah,
but there's funding available for that for nonprofits that serve those particular folks. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions coming in? Chairman Watson.
I'm good to go, you guys. Good job. Good information.
I've never seen you without a question.
He's been typing them in on the side. He's been typing them in on the side.
I've been trying to use technology, but some other people stole my question. So
yeah, we saw your chat question come in, so that's good. Thank you.
I mean, Commissioner, that can be confusing to people when you use definitional words like award versus money that's been distributed. So I think that clarification is important. Thank you.
Yeah, it is, and we'll continue to track this every time because even with this business relief, there's a lot of funds that still have not gone out. And so we've got to keep, the governor mentions that almost every press conference he has. And so we're going to continue to track that. But a lot of these funds, we've got to continue to monitor to make sure that they're getting in the hands of the people that we want.
Yeah, and somehow we need to make sure that we all help spread that word to constituents alike. And that the media can be a real help for us in this effort too. Those businesses that are eligible that can receive a check, just have to provide a piece of information, update their information. Those nonprofits that are out there, this is significantly, important money that they can access, but they have to apply. And that process is not complicated, but you have to do it. So just make sure we get the word out there. We don't want this money to be unused. We want it to go to the people that need it the most.
Very good. So obviously a lot of discussion yet to be had as we continue down this process, particularly with a lot of the congressional action continues to be up in the air. That will affect these initiatives one way or another. So we'll continue to be scheduling future meetings. We'll be talking back to the speakers and follow up and schedule that in the coming weeks. So I'm going to call on Comptroller Wilson to see if he has any parting remarks. But if not, he's always good to move for adjournment.
I move we get out of here.
All right, Mr. Comptroller, thank y'all. Hey, appreciate everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate everybody being on the call today and your participation. I know that we've been talking a lot lately in the last few weeks, and we really appreciate the input and the feedback that we are getting, and we want to continue to do that. So don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll continue to reach out to you as well. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Let me know when we're off.